Well, good evening, everyone. It's 9 o'clock on the dot. Another pretty nice day out there today. I didn't get out there as much as I really wanted to today. I hope you guys did. It was excuse me, just kind of a busy day. I'm really doing everything I can to wrap my head around and get this new grading process, which is rather tedious. Not really grading things is. I don't think grading things is that different, but inputting things, because now we're doing attributes and not actual grades. Literally takes about, I don't know, 20 times longer than it used to. So, anywho, let's get into our book. We're doing great. We've been kind of cranking out like a chapter a night. So let's get back to our family. Again, things are not going great, but we're always hoping that things are going to go better. And last night there was a lot of talk about how Jurgis and everybody are working hard to make sure that the next generation of now their new immigrant family is going to have things a little bit easier, a little better. Which I ultimately think is not just the goal of parents, or that's what I guess I kind of always assumed the goal of parents were to give their kids a better way of life. So anywho, let's get into it. Got some good news, controversial news to talk about tonight. So chapter 11. During the summer, the packing houses were full of activity. And again, Jurgis made more money. He did not make so much, however, as he had the previous summer, for the packers took on more hands. There were new men every week, it seemed. It was a regular system, and this number they would keep over the next slack season, so that everyone would have less than ever. Sooner or later, by this plan, they would have all the floating labor of Chicago trained to do their work, and how very cunning a trick that was. The men were to teach new hands, who would someday come and break their strike. And meantime, they were kept so poor that they could not prevail for the trial. Whoops, there we go. But let no one suppose that this superfluidity of employment meant easier work for anyone. On the contrary, the speeding up seemed to be growing more savage all the time. They were continually inventing new devices to crowd the work on. It was for all the world like the thumbscrew of the medieval torture chamber. They would get new pacemakers and pay them more. They would drive the men with all the new machinery. It was said that in the hog killing rooms, the speed at which the hogs moved was determined by clockwork, and it was increased a little every day. In piecework, they would reduce the time, requiring the same work in a shorter time, and paying the same wages. And then after the workers had accustomed themselves to the new speed, they would reduce the rate of payment to correspond with the reduction in time. They had done this so often in the canning establishment that the girls were fairly desperate. Their wages had gone down by a full third in the past 2 years, and a storm of discontent was brewing that was likely to break any day. Only a month after Marijah had become a beef trimmer, the canning factory that she had left posted a cut that would divide the girls' earnings squarely in half. So great was the indignation as this that they marched out with even a parley and organized in the street outside. One of the girls had read somewhere that a red flag was the proper symbol for oppressed workers, and so they mounted one and paraded about the yards, yelling with rage. A new union was the result of this outburst, but the impromptu strike went to pieces in 3 days, owing to the rush of new labor. At the end of it, the girl who had carried the red flag went downtown and got a position in a great department store at a salary of $2.50 a week. Jurgis and Ona heard these stories with dismay, for there was no telling when their own time might come. Once or twice there had been rumors that one of the big houses was going to cut its unskilled men to 15 cents an hour. And Jurgis knew that if it was to be done, his turn would come soon. He had learned by this time that Packingtown was really not a number of firms at all, but one great big firm, the Beef Trust. And every week the managers of it got together and compared notes. And there was one scale for all the workers in the yards and one standard of efficiency. Jurgis was told that they also had fixed the price they would pay for beef on the hoof and the price of the dressed meat in the country. But that was something he did not understand or care about. The only one who was not afraid of a cut was Marijah, who congratulated herself, somewhat naively, that there had been one in her place only a short time before she came. Marijah was getting to be a skilled beef trimmer and was mounting to the heights again. During this summer and fall, Jurgis and Ona managed to pay her back the last penny they owed her, so she began to have a bank account. Tasmos had a bank account also, and they ran a race and began to figure upon household expenses once more. The possession of vast wealth entails cares and responsibility. However, as poor Marijah found out, she had taken the advice of a friend and invested her savings in a bank on Ashton Avenue. Of course, she knew nothing about it, except that it was big and imposing. What possible chance has a poor foreign working girl to understand the banking business, as it is conducted in this land of frenzied finance? So Marijah lived in continual dread lest something should happen to her bank, and would go out of her way mornings to make sure that it was still there. Her principal thought was a fire, for she had deposited her money in bills and was afraid that if it were burned up, the bank would not give her any others. Jurgis made fun of her for this, for he was a man that was proud of his superior knowledge, telling her that the bank had fireproof vaults and all its millions of dollars hidden safely away within them. However, one morning Marijah took her usual detour and to the horror and dismay saw a crowd of people in front of the bank, filling the avenue solid for a block and a half. All the blood went out of her face with terror. She broke into a run, shouting to the people to ask what was going on, but not stopping to hear what they answered till she had come out to where the throng was so dense that she could no longer advance. There was a run on the bank, they told her then, but she did not know what that was, and turned from one person to another, trying in an agony of fear to make out what that meant. Had something gone wrong with the bank? Nobody was sure, but they thought so. Couldn't she get her money? There was no telling. The people were afraid not, and they were all trying to get it. It was too early yet to tell anything. The bank would not open for nearly 3 hours. So in a frenzy of despair, Marijah began to claw her way toward the doors of the building, through a throng of men, women, and children, all as excited as herself. It was a scene of wild confusion, women shrieking and wringing their hands and fainting, and men fighting and trampling down everything in their way. In the midst of the melee, Marijah recollected that she did not have her bank book, could not get her money anyway, so she fought her way out and started to run for home. This was fortunate for her, for a few minutes later the police reserves arrived. In an hour, excuse me. In an hour, Marijah was back, Tedda with her, both of them breathless and running with sick and fear. The crowd now formed in a line extending for several blocks, with 100 policemen keeping guard, and so there was nothing for them to do but to take their places at the end of it. At 9 o'clock, the bank opened and began to pay the waiting throng. But then what good did it do for Marijah? For she saw 3,000 people before her, enough to take out the last penny of a dozen banks. To make matters worse, a drizzling rain came up and soaked them to the skin. Yet all the morning they stood there, creeping slowly towards the goal. And at afternoon they stood there heartsick, seeing that the hour of closing was coming, and that they were going to be left out. Marijah made up her mind that, come what might, she would stay there and keep her place. But as nearly all did the same, all through the long, cold night, she might get very close to the bank for that. Toward evening, Jurgis came. He had heard the story from the children and he bought some food and dry wraps, which made things a little easier. The next morning before daybreak came a bigger crowd than ever, and more policemen from downtown. Marija held on like a death grip, and toward afternoon she got to the bank and she got her money, all in big silver dollars, a handkerchief full. When she had once got her hands on them, her fear vanished, and she wanted to put them back again. But the man at the window was savage and said that the bank would receive no more deposits for those who had taken part in the run. So Marija was forced to take her dollars home with her, watching to her right and left, expecting any instant someone would try to rob her. When she got home, she was not much better off, until she could find another bank where nothing to do was to sew them up in her clothes. Excuse me. There was nothing to do but to sew them up in her clothes. So Marija went about for a week or so, loaded down with silver bullion, and afraid to cross the street in front of the house, because Jurgis told her that she would sink out of sight and out of the mud. Waited this way, she made her way to the yards, again in fear, this time to see if she had lost her place. But fortunately, about 10% of the working people of Packingtown had been depositors in that bank, and it was not convenient to discharge that many at once. The cause of the panic had been the attempt of policemen to arrest a drunken man in the saloon next door, which had drawn a crowd at the hour and the people on their way to work. And so that started the run. So something odd happened near the bank, and that's what created the crowd of people. And from that, rumors started to spread, and that's what created the run on the bank. So everybody at once started to go and remove their money from the bank. So it wasn't an actual problem with the bank. So about this time, Jurgis and Ona had also began a bank account. Besides having paid Jonas and Marija, they had almost paid for their furniture and could have that little sum to count on. So long as each of them could bring home $9 to $10 a week, they were able to get along finely. Also, election day had come around again, and Jurgis had made a week's wages out of that, all net profit. It was a very close election that year, and the echoes of the battle reached ever to Packingtown. The two rival sets of grafters hired halls and set off fireworks and made speeches to try to get people interested in the matters. Although Jurgis did not understand it at all, he knew enough by this time to realize that it was not supposed to be the right to sell your vote. However, as everyone did it, and his refusal to join would not have made the slightest difference in the results. The idea of refusing would have seemed absurd had it ever come to his head. Now chill winds and shortening days began to warn them that the winter was coming again. It seemed as if the respite had been too short. They had not had the time enough to get ready for it, but still it came. Exonerably, and the hunted look began to come back into the eyes of little Stanislavus. The prospect, struck fear to the heart of Jurgis also, for he knew that Ona was not fit to face the cold and the snowdrifts this year. And suppose that someday when a blizzard struck them and the cars were not running, Ona would have to give up and would come the next day to find that her place was given to someone who lived nearer and can be depended on more. It was the week before Christmas that the first storm came, and then the soul of Jurgis rose up with him like a sleeping lion. There were 4 days that the Ashland Avenue cars were stalled, and in those days, for the first time in his life, Jurgis knew what it was to be really opposed. He had faced difficulties before, but they had been child's play. Now there was a death struggle, and all the furies were unchained within him. The first morning they set out 2 hours before dawn, Ona wrapped in blankets and tossed upon his shoulder like a sack of meal, and the little boy bundled nearly out of sight, hanging to his coattails. There was a raging blast beating on his face, and the thermometer stood below zero. The snow was never short of his knees, and in some of the drifts it was nearly up to his armpits. It would catch his feet and try to trip him. It would build itself into a wall before him and beat him back, and he would fling himself into it, plunging like a wounded buffalo, puffing and snorting in rage. So foot by foot he drove his way, and when at last he came to Durham's, he was staggering and almost blind. He leaned up against a pillar, gasping and thanking God that the cattle came in late and the killing to the killing beds that day. In the evening, the same thing had to be done again, and because Jurgis could not tell what hour of night he would get off, he got a saloon keeper to let Ona sit and wait for him in the corner. Once it was 11 o'clock at night, the black as pit, but they still got home. The blizzard knocked many a man out, for the crowd outside begging for work was never greater, and the packers would not wait long for anyone. When it was over, the soul of Jurgis was a song, for he had met the enemy and conquered, and felt himself the master of his fate. So it would be with some monarch in the forest that had vanquished his foes in a fair fight, and then falls into some cowardly trap in the nighttime. A time of peril on the killing beds was when a steer broke loose. Sometimes, in the haste of speeding up, they would dump one of the animals out on the floor before it was fully stunned, and would get upon its feet and run amok. Then there would be a yell of warning, and the men would drop everything and dash for the nearest pillar, slipping here and there on the floor and tumbling over each other. This was bad enough in the summer when a man could see. In wintertime, it was enough to make your hair stand up, for the room would be so full of steam that you could not make anything out 5 feet in front of you. To be sure, the steer was generally blind and frantic, and not especially bent on hurting anyone. But think of the chances of running upon a knife while nearly every man had one in his hand. Then, to cap the climax, the floor boss would come rushing up with a rifle and begin blazing away. Yikes! That's what they did to deal with the runaway steers. Is they would let's bring in a rifle in a steam filled room and gun them down, start shooting wildly. There you go. It was in one of these melees that Jurgis fell into his trap. That is the only word to describe it. It was so cruel and so utterly not to be foreseen. At first, he hardly noticed it. It was such a slight accident, simply that in leaping out of the way, he turned his ankle. There was a twinge of pain, but Jurgis was used to pain, and it did not coddle himself. When he came to walk home, however, he realized it was hurting him a great deal. In the morning, his ankle was swollen and nearly double its size. He could not get his foot into a shoe. Still, even then, he did nothing more than swear a little. He wrapped his foot in old rags and hobbled out to take to the car. It chanced to be a rush day at Durham's, and all the long morning he limped about on his aching foot. By noontime, the pain was so great that it made him faint, and after a couple of hours in the afternoon, he was fairly beaten and had to tell the boss. They sent for the company doctor, and he examined the foot and told Jurgis to go home to bed, adding that he had probably laid himself up for months by this folly. The injury was not one that Durham and Company could be held responsible for, and so that was all there was to it, so far as the doctor was concerned. Jurgis got home somehow, scarcely able to see for the pain, and with an awful terror in his soul, Elizabeta helped him into bed, bandaged his injured foot with cold water, and tried hard not to let him see her dismay. When the rest came home that night, she met them outside and told them, and they too put on a cheerful face, saying it would only be for a week or two, and then that they would pull him through. My mouth is very dry tonight. When they had gotten him to sleep, however, they sat by the kitchen fire and talked it over in frightened whispers. They were in for a siege. That was plainly to be seen. Jurgis only had about $60 in the bank, and the slack season was upon them. Both Jonas and Marija soon would be earning no more than enough to pay their board. And besides that, there were only wages of Ona and the pittance of the little boy. There was the rent to pay and still some of the furniture. There was the insurance just due, and every month there was sack after sack of coal. It was January, midwinter, an awful time to have to face privation. Deep snows would come again, and who would carry Ona to her work now? She might lose her place. She was almost certain to lose it. Then little Stanislaus began to whimper. Who would take care of him? It was dreadful that an accident of this sort, no man can help, should have meant such suffering. The bitterness of it was the daily food and what it bleh, the bitterness of it was the daily food and drink of Jurgis. It was of no use of them to try to deceive him. He knew as much about the situation as they did, and knew that the family might literally starve to death. The worry of it fairly ate him up. He began to look haggard the first 2, 3 days of it. In truth, it was almost maddening for the young man like him, a fighter, to have to lie there helpless on his back. It was all for the world the old story of Prometheus bound. As Jurgis lay in his bed, hour after hour, there came to him emotions that had never been known before. Before this, he had met life with a welcome. It had its trials, but none that a man could not face. By now, in the nighttime, when he lay tossing about, there would come stalking into his chamber a grisly phantom, the sight of which made his flesh curl and his hair bristle up. It was like seeing the world far away from the underneath of his feet, like plunging down into the bottomless abyss, into yawning caverns of despair. It might be true then, after all, what others had told him about life, that the best powers of man might not be equal to it. It might be true that, strive as he would, toil as he would, he might fail and go down and be destroyed. The thought of this was like an icy hand at his heart. The thought that here, in the ghastly home of all horror, he and all those who were dear to him might lie and perish of starvation and cold, and there would be no ear to hear their cry, no hand to help them. It was true that here in this huge city with the stores of heaping wealth, human creatures might be hunted down and destroyed by a wild beast, while by the wild beast powers of nature, just as truly as there had ever been in the days of cavemen. Ona was now making about $30 a month, and Stanislaus about 13. To add to this, there was the board of Jonas and Marija, about $45. Deducting from this the rent, interest, and installments on the furniture, left about $60. And deducting the coal, they had about 50. They did without everything the human beings could do without. They went in old and ragged clothing and left them at the mercy of the cold. And when the children's shoes wore out, they tied them up with string. Half invalid as she was, Ona would do herself harm by walking in the rain and cold when she ought to have ridden. They bought literally nothing but food, and still they could not keep alive on $50 a month. They might have done it if only they could have gotten pure food at fair prices, or if only they had known what to get. If they hadn't been so pitifully ignorant. But they had come to a new country where everything was different, including the food. They had always been accustomed to eat a great deal of smoked sausage, and how could they know that what they bought in America was not the same? The color was made by chemicals, and the smoky flavor by more chemicals, and it was full of potato flour. Potato flour is the waste of potato after the starch and alcohol had been extracted, and it was no more food value than so much of wood. And as its use as a food adulterate, is a penal offense in Europe. Thousands of tons of it are shipped to America every year. It was amazing that quantities of food such as this were needed every day by 11 hungry persons. $1.65 a day was simply not enough to feed them, and there was no use trying. And so each week they made an inroad upon the pitiful little bank account that Ona had begun. Because the account was in her name, it was impossible for her to keep this secret from her husband and to keep the heart sickedness to her own. It would have been much better if Jurgis had been really ill, if he had not been able to think. for he had no resources such as most invalids have. Although all he could do was to lie there and toss about from side to side. Now and then he would break into cursing, regardless of everything, and then now and then his impatience would get the better of him, and he would try to get up. And poor Tetta would have to plead with him in a frenzy. Elizabetta was all alone with him the greater part of the time. She would sit and smooth his forehead by the hour, and talk to him and try to make him forget. Sometimes it would be too cold for the children to go to school, and they would have to play in the kitchen where Jurgis was, because it was the only room that was half warm. These were dreadful times, for Jurgis would get as cross as any bear, and was scarcely to be blamed, for he had had enough to worry him, and it was hard when he was trying to take a nap and keep awake by noisy and peevish children. Elizabetta's only resource in those times was little Antanas. Indeed, it would be hard to say how they could have gotten along if it had not been for the little Antanas. It was the one consolidation of Jurgis' long imprisonment that now he had time to look at his baby. Elizabetta would put the clothes basket in which the baby slept alongside of his mattress. Jurgis would lie upon one elbow and watch him by the hour, imagining things. Then little Antanas would open his eyes. He was beginning to take notice of things now, and he would smile. Oh, how he would smile. So Jurgis would begin to forget and be happy because he was in the world where there was a little thing so beautiful as the smile of little Antanas. And because such a world could but be good at the heart of it. He looked more like his father every hour, Elizabetta would say, and said it many times a day, because she saw that it pleased Jurgis. The poor little terror-stricken woman was planning all day and all night to soothe the prison giant who was entrusted to her care. Jurgis, who knew nothing about the age-long and everlasting hypocrisy of women, would take the bait and grin with delight. Then he would hold his finger in front of little Antanas' eye and move it this way and that, and laugh with glee to see the baby follow it. There was no pet quite so fascinating as a baby, and he would look into Jurgis' face with such uncanny seriousness, and Jurgis would start to cry. Paluk, look, Mama, he knows his papa. He does. Tumano Srezdeli, the little rascal. That's pretty good Lithuanian there, if I say so myself. All right. Well, we're already at chapter 12, but we've got a couple minutes, so I'm going to push on a little bit. And then we'll get to the news. I just swallowed a little chip of ice. For 3 weeks after his injury, Jurgis never got up from bed. And it was a very obstinate sprain. The swelling would not go down, and the pain still continued. At the end of that time, however, he could contain himself no longer and began to try to walk a little every day, laboring to persuade himself that he was getting better. No arguments could stop him, and 3 or 4 days later, he declared he was going back to work. He limped to the cars and got to Brown's, where he had found that the boss had kept his place. That is, was willing to turn out into the snow the poor devil that he had hired in the meantime. Every now and then the pain would force Jurgis to stop work, but he stuck it out till nearly an hour before closing. Then he was forced to acknowledge that he could not go on without fainting. It almost broke his heart to do it, and he stood leaning against the pillar, weeping like a child. 2 of the men had to help him to the car. When he got out, he had to sit down and wait to the snow till someone came along. So they put him to bed again and sent for the doctor. And as they ought to have done in the beginning, it transpired that he had a twisted tendon out of place and could never have gotten well without attention. Then he gripped the sides of the bed and he shut his teeth together. He turned white with agony while the doctor pulled and wrenched away the swollen ankle. When finally the doctor left, he told him that he would have to lie quiet for 2 months, and that if he went back to work before that time, he would lame himself. 3 days later, there came another heavy snowfall. Jonas and Marija and Ona and little Stanislavs all set out together an hour before daybreak to try to get to the yards. About noon, the last two came back, the boy screaming with pain. His fingers were frosted, it seemed. They had to give up trying to get to the yards and had nearly perished in a drift. All they knew how to do was hold the frozen fingers near the fire. So little Stanislaus spent most of the day dancing about in horrible agony, till Jurgis flew into a passion of nervous rage and swore like a madman, declaring that he would kill him if he did not stop. All that day and night, the family was half crazed with fear that Ona and the boy had lost their places. In the morning, they set out earlier than ever, after the little foal had been beaten with a stick by Jurgis. There could be no trifling in the case like this. It was a matter of life and death. Little Stanislaus could not be expected to realize that he might a great deal better freeze in the snowdrift than lose his job at the lard machine. Ona was quite certain that she would find her place gone, and was all nerved when she finally got to Brown's and found that the forelady herself had failed to come, and therefore compelled to be lenient. Oh, that's a little lucky for her. So her boss had not shown up. So therefore, she did not lose her job. All right, my friends, we're doing really good. We got a chapter done and a couple pages in, and boy, it's still not the cheeriest of books here, but you know what? The family is fighting and persevering, and I don't know, reading it kind of makes me put what we're going through into, perspective. Like right now, we ain't doing that bad compared to these folks. At least I don't think so. We don't have to walk anywhere in 6 feet of snow and worried all the time about money and losing our job and eating this crappy food. And well, though I don't know, some of us might be eating crappy food right now, but anyway, perspective. We're doing a little better than these immigrants that were coming to our country. And, imagine that too. Imagine how many people probably immigrated here, probably got here right as all this started, or maybe not that long ago got here, and they've been trying to put themselves, together, try to get their families together, try to get life together. And, what do they have to contend with? This 22 million people are out of work right now. Okay. Oh boy, my mouth is dry tonight. So what do we got tonight for you, my friends? What do we got tonight? So, it's always tough kind of saying this, but the good news, and again, relative, is it good news? Well, only 478 New Yorkers died in the past 24 hours. So, that is down. Man, this light is killing me here. I got a new desk lamp, and I think I need the bulb is too bright. But that is down considerably. It still means that every 2 days, another 1,000 New Yorkers are dying. And I guess we're closing in on about 17,000 New Yorkers that have died from this. However, here's something that I read tonight. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have from time to time kind of wondered this. And it looks like my wonder was legitimate. So doctors actually think that this number that we've actually lost maybe as many as 4,000 to 5,000 more people from the coronavirus. But early on, as people died, and we weren't really 100% sure what was going on. They were not tested, and people didn't really know. So what they've been trying to do as they're analyzing, right? There are scientists and there are doctors out there that are dealing with, how do we stop this? How do we keep it from happening again? Right? That's a group of people. How do we keep this from happening again? Well, they've got to look at all the data. So they're starting to go back, and they've seen that somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 people died of similar things that the people that have died of corona since we've kind of first called the pandemic out. So this number could truly be close to 20,000 New Yorkers, and who knows how many that means across the country. But again, we're still we make up about a third of the amount of deaths in the country are from New York State. So that's pretty significant. All right, where to start with? So last night I talked to you about excuse me. There was this call for grocery stores to stop letting people in, or stop letting more people in than necessary. And I told you I had gone to Walmart this weekend, and there was somebody counting the people coming in. So more experts, it's not the government, but more experts are now saying, yeah, this is not good. More grocery store people are getting COVID. More grocery store people are dying. If you think about how many people in any one day one clerk at a grocery store might deal with, that's kind of crazy. Every single person could be carrying that. And if they get it, they're going to be giving it to other people. So they're now encouraging stores. And again, this is not the government. This is experts saying stores need to really try to do some kind of curbside pickup, right? So you call the store, you say, I need milk, I need eggs, I need butter, I need a pound of bologna. And they take your stuff, they put it in a bag, and then somehow they whether you call with your credit card or debit card or write a check or do whatever, you pay for it. So it seems as though now this is 2 days in a row. New experts are saying that we really are. I should say more experts are saying we really need to move to this. And I think we don't have a Whole Foods out here in Middleburg, but I guess that the Whole Foods in Colony, you can actually do this. You can actually shop through Amazon Prime, and then they bag it up for you. You pay for it. You just go and show up, and then boop boop, there's your bag of goodies. So we shall see. So a lot of crazy money stuff happening today. Lots of crazy money stuff. So as the government rolled out this first, the PPP, right? The Payroll Protection Plan or program, and the SBA, the Small Business Association loans. $2.2 trillion, right? Somebody's calling me. I don't know. It says potential spam. 2.2 trillion, hundreds of $1 billion to go to small businesses, right? So how did this work? It worked like this. A bank would say, okay, we've got X amount of dollars. We can start providing these loans. And they'll, pony up the money for these businesses to be able to keep their businesses rolling. And then the government would reimburse these banks with interest, right? So that's how the banks would make money. And the small or the larger the big business, sorry, let me back up. The larger the small business that came in and applied for a loan, the more money these banks would make when they were being reimbursed, if that makes any sense. So let me give you an example. So we have, Sydney's home care nursing agency, 20 employees. She gets an SBA loan, and I don't know. Martin's First National Bank gives her the loan, but then comes along, I don't know, Stephanie's prescription packing plant, right? And they have 150 people, and they come to Martin First National Bank, and I give them, again, one of these loans. When the government reimburses me, I'm going to get a higher interest rate back, a higher percentage back, for the money that I gave the bigger business, the bigger of the two smaller businesses. So it would be in my benefit as one of these lenders. I would make more money by loaning money to the bigger small businesses. Okay, hopefully that now makes sense. Well, Wells Fargo, which is a big bank, they do mortgages, they do a lot of different stuff, just got nailed today because what they were doing, and there's a lawsuit that's been launched in California, because what they were doing is that when Sydney's little health home care service called them, they denied her. Nope, can't do it. But in truth, they had the money left in the amount of money that they could give out in loans. What they were doing was they were holding out for the bigger small businesses to come forward. So, Wells Fargo, I want to say about a year ago, got nailed big time because they were messing with, I think it was interest rates, mortgage interest rates, and people were overpaying their mortgages, but they weren't receiving the credit. And, the Wells Fargo had to pay out hundreds of billions of dollars in fines. And here they are a year later, still playing games. So we'll see. Now, this is a lawsuit, but apparently they've got him. It seems like they've got him. So we'll see what comes of it. But they are being charged with the misuse of the payroll protection program funds. And apparently, this has gained them millions of dollars in additional profits. And along the way, they were lying to small businesses saying, no, we ran out of money, but they really hadn't. Okay. Okay, so here's the other thing in regards to these PPP loans, right? These payroll protection program loans. They are intended for small businesses. They are intended for Sydney's Home Health Agency, 20 employees, Top's Diner, right? Curry Freeze, all these places. These are the types of businesses that this money was set aside for. So apparently, chain stores have been approved to get funding through these programs. So I was reading today, and I've never heard of this chain. Apparently, it's a pretty popular chain. The Shake Shack. The Shake Shack. They apparently, here's what I kind of thought was funny. Their name is the Shake Shack, and what they're known for are their burgers. The Shake Shack? Okay. Anyways, So they borrowed through the PPP $10 million. A chain store, which has remained open, got $10 million through this program. So, question mark. Did they need the money? If they are a chain outlet, right? If they are a corporation that is doing business, is this the type of company that we want to give this money to? So, I'm not saying no, but when this bill was first being introduced, and Republicans were pointing fingers at Democrats and saying, you're holding this up, you're not getting this money out to people, blah, 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 blah. Well, what Democrats were saying is, listen, whoa, chill, right? We want to get money out to people, but we want there to be clear rules. We want to make sure that this money gets to the right people. And this is what they're talking about. Should chains, should Mickey D's, should Popeyes, should Five Guys, should TCBY qualify for small business loans? I don't know. I didn't even think it was possible. But again, I watched the CEO of this company speak today about giving back the $10 million. And it's like, I don't know. Like, I mean, if I said, hey guys, listen, things are kind of rough right now. I really need like 10 grand. And somebody gave me 10 grand. And then I was like, you know what? Yeah, take the 10 grand back. I really didn't need it. I don't know. I mean, what's all that about? I don't know. To me, not cool. Let me know what you guys think. So now on top of everything, right? 2.2 trillion being spent. Now the Senate is going to pick up another $450 billion small business bailout. So a second bailout in 3 weeks. This would push it to be about a total of $2.7 trillion to go out to businesses. But this one is also going to have money to help hospitals. So already out of that $2.2 trillion, the money that was set aside for small businesses, 1.7 million loans have been put out to small businesses. And again, the money's gone. The money ran out. So now the Senate is trying to put together another $450 billion to help small business and hospitals. So, again, let's go back, because we've talked about this. Let's go back to the stimulus money, right? I am working. I have a job. I am sitting in this bleeping chair. I don't know how many hours a day. And I did get a portion of that stimulus check. Why? Right? Why? Well, the government wants me to spend that money. They don't want me to hold on to that money. They want me to spend it at local businesses. And that's what I've been doing. But if I were to just, take it and, I don't know, buy $1,200 in lottery tickets or something like that, right? I mean, that's not really helping things. Or if I were to just take it and, throw it in a box under my bed or in a closet, that's not circulating that money around the economy. So, like, when I look at these chain businesses that are applying, first of all, they're applying for these loans when they know they don't need them. Like, they're being given millions of dollars, and then days later, they're giving millions of dollars back. And in the meantime, how many small businesses were turned away? How many small businesses could have used that money to keep their employees being paid, to keep the doors open, to keep things rolling, but they couldn't get it because they were turned away. Yet this corporation got $10 million that they didn't need. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think about it, but kind of frustrates me. I know I shouldn't. Well, I don't know that they got caught. I think that the guy from the Shake Shack, when I heard him talking today, um, it's because other companies got caught that he gave his money back. But I don't know. I don't know. Uh, One of the things that we do and I think it's us as a society, our culture, is that we get mad, we get upset, and we react and we do things. And, we got worried, we got upset, we need to borrow money, we need to give money, we need to stimulate the economy. Okay. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But I also think that when your emotions are up, when your dander's up, you got to kind of let things calm down, and you've got to let cooler heads prevail and really think things through. And I'm not saying that Republicans did anything wrong, but I don't see why waiting a couple days to scratch out more rules and to make sure that we really think these things out is all that bad of an idea. I don't know. When I've hunted for a long time, and when I first got my did my hunter's course, one of the instructors said, he said, this may be the best advice that I'm going to give you, is that the number one way hunters get, at least this was the time, 16, 17 years ago, he said the number one way that hunters get hurt is when they are trying to get up and down out of their stand, and they're trying to retrieve a deer that they had shot. And, he said, this is the greatest advice that I can give you, is that when you shoot a deer, or at least you think you've shot a deer, sit down, take out your thermos, have a drink of water, have a cup of coffee, whatever's in your drink bottle. Breathe for a couple minutes. Just calm down. And I can tell you from experience that, you may not think it, but when you hunt and when you shoot a deer, whether with a bow or with a gun, there is a lot of excitement, and there is a lot of and it's not like, yeah, I killed this dumb deer, right? But there's this something inside of you that just gets going, and your heart gets pumping. And I remember the first time I shot probably the biggest deer that I shot this really big 10-point buck, and I could feel my heart pounding. And I knew, and I thought about that guy, and I pulled my water bottle out of my pack. I downed the whole water bottle. I just sat there. I relaxed, because I thought, you know what, the deer's not going anywhere. I'll get to it, right? Hopefully, I got a good hit on it, and it's not going to go anywhere. And that's kind of what I think about with all of this, like taking some time, letting your head really settle. It's what we needed, and I think we did it to a certain degree, but not maybe as much as we should have. Mrs. D says, I think it would be better to get caught or own up to it now than have it come out later, because it adds up to a level of deception on top of it. Sure. And I'm hoping that, on top of that, well said, that you can, or now we can take the money back and say to some of these companies that got denied, hey, guess what? We found a little bit of money. So hopefully we'll get some of that out. Okay. What else do we have here? So, some big corporations began to open up doors today. Boeing, which makes planes and missiles and all that kind of good stuff, opened up its doors. And Bobcat, which, Bobcat makes these like little they like these little tractor kind of things and farm machinery kind of things. They both opened their doors up today. We're not talking about a lot of workers that went back to work. I want to say it was about, I think I read out of the two companies, like 120,000 workers are back to work today, but we're still 22 million Americans out of work. And one of the things, and I was talking to Ms. Howday about this today. So now one of the things, if this continues on, one of the things that the federal government is considering, and they're trying to draw up plans right now, is to basically give everyone a stimulus check, everyone that got the other stimulus check. And this is going to change. This is not going to stay this way. But to give every one of these people about $2,000 a month. And I don't think that if they did continue on with more stimulus checks, that it would be for everyone and that it would be for, that amount of money. But this is like the first incarnation of this plan. And I think what it really comes down to is they're kind of saying, like, how do we give it to one person and not give it to the next? And again, the reason everybody's getting this money is because we want people to spend it, but we want people to spend it in a smart way. So I really hope that people are doing that. I really do. So last bit of kind of, questionable, sad, scary, I think more scary news is that, part of what the federal government is doing with its money is that it is kicking money to states. So it's saying, well, let's take this money and we'll look at the states that have been the hardest hit and we're going to give them additional aid. Well, right now, the governor is saying that if we do not get additional aid from the federal government, we are looking at about a 20% cut across the board for education, for hospital funding, for local governments, for state governments, for libraries, for anything that gets state aid during the year. The governor today said we might be looking at about a 20% cut across the board. So we'll take it away from everything. So that's not what we want to hear moving forward, because that's a lot of jobs, right? That's a lot of jobs and that's a lot of services. Stay tuned. We'll see what comes of that. But one of the things, and I'm certainly not, and I don't own like Price Chopper stock. Number one, because it's privately owned. But Price Chopper is teaming up with the state. I told you guys that today there are these antibody tests that are happening. So I guess in a number of locations in the Capital District, Price Chopper Market 32 is working with the state to be testing facilities. So they've set up like they're like little tents and stuff like that. And a couple of the Price Shoppers in the Capital District are working with the states to get that done. Which is really, really cool. Okay. So let me see. Is that everything? No. Oh boy. Okay. So here's the biggie. So, my friends, if you have oil heat, I'm going to give you a suggestion. Go fill up the tank. If you're doing okay, money-wise, have your tank filled up. Right now, there is such a surplus in oil that American oil prices are literally, meaning barrels, how they sell barrels of oil, At one point today, apparently the price went into the negative, which I'm not really sure how the heck that can happen on the stock market. Um, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to call my oil company, and I'm going to have my oil tank filled because prices, and I'm interested to see what in the next few days the price of gasoline is going to probably plummet. But the world kept producing oil, but we're not using it, right? We're just not using it nearly the way that we've been using it. So, excuse me. So these big stockpiles, and apparently American refineries are literally starting to overflow with oil and gasoline and kerosene and all those things. Not necessarily natural gas, but gasoline. So it may be a prudent time over the next few days. Yeah, the futures prices, yep, were negative. And that's it was like negative $37 or something like that in the futures prices. So that's incredible, right? That's just absolutely incredible. So now the Middle East and Russia have decided that they're going to turn off the production of oil. They're going to start slowing it down, and this way they'll start creating not a shortage, but it'll allow the oil that's been produced and is being shipped for things to kind of balance out. And hopefully we won't go on a run on oil, but I would think that in the next few days, really keep an eye on it. I'm going to call, like I said, I'm going to call my oil company in the morning and see what their prices are at. But holy moly, right? Unbelievable what's going on with oil prices. Okay. Here we go. This day in history, my friends. On this day in 1777, no, I was not alive, the New York State Constitution was ratified. Woo, New York State. On this day in 1861, Robert E. Lee resigned his commission as an American military officer. So when the Civil War starts out, Winfield Scott, who is the top general, he is told by Lincoln that we need to find a commander of the Union forces, and Scott and Lincoln give that to Robert E. Lee. They say, "Hey, Lee, you're our man. We're going to give you the run of things," and he turns it down. And he says that he loves America and he has spent his whole life as an officer fighting for America. But, and he went to West Point. However, he can never fight against his real home country, which he says is Virginia, right? So again, the fight of the American Civil War is that fight between states' rights versus federal rights. And Lee is a believer in states' rights, and that what he's really fighting for is for that state of Virginia that resides in America. In 1871, and I had never heard of this before, but the Ku Klux Klan Act, or the official name was the Third Force Act, 1871. So this is during Reconstruction, is passed. And what this did is it gave Ulysses Grant, during while his time in the South, gave him extra authority, not only to declare, that martial law was declared in the South, but gave him the additional authority to hunt down members of the Klan. On this day in 1898, President McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war against Spain. On this day in 1940, the first electron microscope was used. This date, 1940, the first electron microscope. So you think about the world as in the Great Depression, but we are still coming up and creating awesome inventions when it comes to the world of science. On this day in 1999, and yes, I was alive then, 13 dead and 23 wounded in the Columbine, Colorado school shooting, right? Two members of a club, the Trenchcoat Mafia, I think 118 and 117. They've got plans to do a lot of damage at the school. And they do a lot of damage, right? Killing 13 and wounding 23 is a lot, but had their true plans, gone off, they would have killed a lot more. And on this day in 2010, the British Petroleum, or BP, Deepwater Horizon, 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana, explodes in one of the worst natural disaster accidents in our history, in world history. I can't remember how many gallons actually poured out, but when I was growing up, the Exxon Valdez, can't remember that guy's name, Hazelwood, I think was the captain. He had been drunk while the ship was, transporting oil. I can't remember what exactly it hit. I think it ran aground and spilled all this oil, and holy cow, this is the worst thing ever. And what happened out off the shores of Louisiana, 100 times worse, right? Without a doubt, 100 times worse. The other thing, and I don't know if you guys heard about this, and I didn't say anything about it last night because it was kind of hot off the presses, but 18 people have died in Nova Scotia. A gunman, apparently dressed as a police officer in Nova Scotia, and they don't have a motive yet, but carried out these attacks, shooting at people that he knew were kind of hunkered down in their houses, social distancing. So they don't have a motive yet. And I did a little more research on it today, and still they couldn't find a motive. But there's some scary dudes and scary dudettes out there. I didn't hear a lot about, we talked last night about those protests in Michigan, but more and more of these protests are starting to take place where people are saying, okay, this is it. We need to get back to work. We need to get life going. And they're, clearly breaking these social distancing guidelines. They're out in public. They're not wearing masks. Some of these protests have been armed protests, not that they're shooting at people, but they are carrying guns, which is their, in their states, their constitutional rights to do so. But it's, things are definitely heating up and getting interesting. And I hope we can find a way for cooler minds and cooler heads and cooler hearts to prevail. But that's all I have for you today, guys. A little over our time, about 10 minutes over our time. But the book is a great book. It's not the cheeriest bedtime story, but I think it's a good story of our history. And, we're moving through it, a little more than another chapter tonight. Done. So, as the days go on, we will continue. And I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow night, hopefully with more bright and cheerful news. But keep doing what you're doing. Take it one day at a time. Take it 1 hour at a time. Take it 1 minute at a time if you have to. We're running a marathon. We're not running a sprint. And, we're going to get through it together. So everybody have a good night. I hope to see everybody tomorrow in good health. Be good. And, as always, guys, I miss you. Talk to you tomorrow.